I'm preaching to the choir. Today we have these two examples of parables of Jesus, and the context of it is that he's talking to the Pharisees. For the last few weeks, this has been a dialogue between Jesus and the Pharisees. It's always important to note that the Pharisees and Jesus are not so far theologically apart in many ways. There are several denominations within Judaism at the time of Jesus, most of which don't survive anymore. The modern rabbinic Judaism are the descendants of the Pharisees. But the difference between them is one of how it's interpreted out. The Pharisees are the people that live out in the villages, whereas the Sadducees, which is the other major group, only live around the temple. The temple is their most important part. The Pharisees are out teaching in the villages, and they're very concerned about moral uprightness, and they're very concerned about the observance of the kosher laws, of keeping everything observed correctly. And at this point, they're murmuring. Now, this is the same word that's used in the Greek Old Testament as when the Israelites are out in the wilderness murmuring against Moses. So there's a direct line there that people would pick up at the time, hearing it also. And they're murmuring against him because of who he's eating with. Okay? He's eating with the wrong people. He's eating with tax collectors. You know, to us, that doesn't, an IRS agent may not be somebody you want knocking on your door, but you might go to dinner with one if they were a friend of yours. But this is different, No matter how you feel about our government today, this is a representative democracy. At the time of Jesus, this is an occupying power. So a tax collector isn't somebody who takes in the taxes for the government to run. A tax collector is somebody the Romans have said, we want you to collect so much taxes. And anything you take in over this, you get to keep yourself. So they're extortionists, basically. They are they're thugs. They are people who are considered to be Roman collaborators and traitors to their own people. So it's much more serious than just a tax collector. And he's eating with sinners. Not only people who do wrong things, but people who don't observe all the Jewish ritual laws, who don't keep kosher. So he's got all the wrong people around him. And to be fair, the disciples aren't always too happy about this too. They think Jesus should be mixing with the important people, the people who have power, the people who have influence. And he keeps mixing with these people who have no influence, in fact, negative influence, that get him in trouble with the authorities. And in the context of where we are in the gospel, next week we get the one of the two biggies as far as the parables go, the prodigal son. So this week we have these two parables right in there before the prodigal son. The first one is Jesus talking about the shepherd going after the lost sheep. Now, the problem when we talk about shepherding now is almost none of us have direct experience in shepherding. Most of us have never herded sheep, which are the stupidest animals in the world. And we probably have never even seen a shepherd except on television. In fact, most of us, when we hear shepherd, we usually go to religious places. We think of Jesus as the good shepherd, or the shepherds abiding with their flocks by night, or the shepherds, the Lamb of God. We have all this religious stuff, but we don't see the original meaning very much. So we kind of have this vision when we think of shepherd, quite often of Jesus carrying the little lamb back. But people of Jesus' time had a negative view of shepherds. According to rabbinic writings of the time, they were considered vagabonds and ne'er-do-wells. They're lumped in with thieves, pickpockets, and other disreputable people. They were the kind of people you would expect would watch their flocks by night and then would sneak into town to steal some bread from somebody before they went back to their flock. They're considered inherently dishonest as a group. So you have to imagine what's going on here. The Pharisees are complaining about Jesus eating with the wrong people, and Jesus tells them a story that uses shepherd as a metaphor for God. He's not doing himself any favors here with the Pharisees. He's not making it any easier. Okay, and what's up with what he says that which one of you, having 99, would not go after the one? Well, which one of you would? I mean, you've got a bunch of dumb sheep out in the woods. You got 99 of them. And you leave the 99 to go after the one. That actually doesn't make much sense. Jesus is using hyperbole here. This has confused people early on in Christianity. And The apocryphal Gospel of Thomas, which isn't part of the Bible, but was written by a Greek speaker not too familiar with Jewish custom, was perplexed by this. So he said that the lost one was the biggest sheep. Trying to explain it, trying to say why Jesus would go after the one and leave the 99 in the wilderness. That doesn't make any sense. But if you were a Jewish hearer of the Bible, you would think of something else when you thought of the 99 and the one as far as herd animals. For the last couple of months, I've talked about this concept of the scapegoat mentioned in Leviticus, that every year the people of Israel would load their sins literally on this goat, and the high priest would send this goat out into the wilderness to die, thereby taking the sins of the people with them. That's what's going on here. That's when the Pharisees would hear him talking about the one in the wilderness, their minds would immediately go to the scapegoat. It's such an important part of Leviticus. So, in this parable, the shepherd, and God by extension, is going after the scapegoat. In the kingdom Jesus is initiating, there's no room for loading sin on the back of a group or an individual to sacrifice them in order to keep the community cohesive. And Jesus himself becomes the scapegoat at the crucifixion, and we're to allow our human wrath to be satisfied with that. Because Jesus has hung on the cross as the ultimate scapegoat, we're no longer allowed to make individuals or groups out to be those who hold our blame. All are welcome in God's kingdom, even the tax collectors, even shepherds. In the second parable, we have the woman who loses the coin. Now, the coin she loses is a drachma. It's not much money at all. It's a very small amount. It's not like the silver talents we hear about in another parable. It's a very small amount of money, but she goes bonkers to find it. She's sweeping out the house. She's looking around with the light. She's doing all this kind of stuff. And then, when she finds this incredibly small amount of money, she calls her girlfriends together to celebrate with her that she's found this. You have to imagine that her friends are kind of like, "That's nice. So glad you found it." It's showing what God's like. God is like that. God is that crazy. God is so excited about the finding of the one that the other 9 almost seem immaterial sometimes. And when we think about this metaphor, especially going back to that one of the shepherd, this is a very early one from Roman catacombs. When we think about this parable, we often think about the sheep. We think about grace. How about God goes after the one? But in the context of who Jesus is talking to, it's really about the Pharisees. It's the idea that these parables are addressed to them. It's in the middle of a debate with them, and it's their grumbling that brings them on. If they hadn't been grumbling, they may have never been uttered. These are the ones that are already in relationship with God and are reacting to the ones that Jesus is trying to bring in. These are the good church folk who don't like the kind of people that Jesus is bringing in. Human systems don't like change. And the sheep who Jesus brings in, who God seems to pay so much attention to leaving the rest to fend on their own, are to be welcomed by those who are already there. Yeah, these parables are about grace to those who have wandered away. They're even more about the way we should welcome people who have decided to follow Jesus with us. So we're to react with joy to the fact that we have been brought back, that people are being brought back within. And we'll talk more about that next week. This last week on Wednesday, I went down to Chicago to hear Nadia Bolz-Weber speak. And she is a very interesting person. Okay, she's just released a book. The name of it is Pastrix. She was raised in a fundamentalist home, not unlike many of the homes in Kentucky where I come from. But she was a strong-willed a woman. She tells the story about how in her tradition it was not suffered. Women could not teach men. So up until the time she was 12, she had a female Sunday school teacher, and as soon as her class turned 13, they had to have a male take over because you couldn't have a woman teaching 13-year-old boys because they were men at that point. And she said she couldn't stay in that because she was a strong, smart-mouthed girl, and the church she was raised in had no place for that kind of thing, even though they loved her. She went through a long period of wandering where she was an alcoholic, and she's an alcoholic in recovery, and she eventually found her way into the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which I heard somebody interview her, and the interviewer said, "I can believe that you're a pastor, I just have a hard time believing you're a Lutheran." So she's this ELCA pastor. She is tattooed all over. She cusses like a sailor. She has, matter of fact, she's very good at it. Some people use profanity in ways that don't seem to work. It seems to work with her. She seems to know exactly what she's doing. And this term pastrix was actually a derisive term that people often use about women pastors. And every one of us, this is something she talks about, in the community are simultaneously sinner and saint. We're both in the herd left behind, and we're the one that Jesus leaves the herd to save. And she reminded me of something I haven't said here in a while. I usually try to say this several times a year, and she said it better than I've ever been able to articulate it. She always tells her congregation, this community will disappoint you. It's only a matter of time, not if. We will let you down, or I'll say something stupid and hurt your feelings. I then invite you on this side of that inevitable disappointment to decide if you'll stick around after it happens. Because if you choose to leave when we don't meet your expectations, you won't get to see how the grace of God comes in and fills those holes left by our community's failure. And that's really just too beautiful and too real to miss. I really recommend this book, but you have to be able to enjoy profanity in order. Oh, look, Andy Feldner and McCook are already checking the Kindle version out as well. We are all sinners and saints, and we're all members of the herd and the one that the shepherd goes after. But no matter where we find ourselves, we're called to welcome back the ones that we, our society, and sometimes the church has used as the scapegoat. We're to be about the business of joy, that God is constantly bringing in the outsiders of our society and asking us to make them part of our community. Amen.